So many science fiction stories feature some kind of synthetic life, whether it be robots, androids, or formless artificial intelligence. Many of these also tend to include apocalyptic scenarios where the created have risen up against their creators. The origins of synthetic life across different fictional universes tend to be actually fairly similar. Scientists seek either a new evolution for organics or the means to expand their influence further and faster beyond organic potential. While in some cases the creators of synthetic life may not be the most benevolent themselves, it is most often born from a desire for good. Generally, the idea is to protect organic life and expand the creator's potential by making use of enhanced synthetic physical and cognitive abilities. In many of these stories, there is a time of prosperity before the war. The created fill their roles and their organic creators experience something of a golden age for a time. Then, the other shoe drops. Depending on the story, synthetics may grow beyond their original intended purpose, or may reach a conclusion in pursuit of that purpose that runs contrary to the interests of their creators. Sometimes the creators fear that something like this will happen and strike first, making their fears come true. AI is a very relevant topic for all of us today. It's being forced into just about everything, and the environmental impact of supporting it is growing by the day. There are potential uses for it, sure, but the way it's being handled right now is detrimental to the Earth and the people inhabiting it. Still though, what we are calling AI in the real world is very different from dystopian sci-fi stories with an AI overlord. However, I do think that exploring some of these stories from a philosophical standpoint can help to better inform views on the AI of today. Let's take a look at some of the biggest sci-fi universes and see what they can tell us about how synthetic and organic intelligence relate. Science fiction as a genre, as we know it in the modern age, is widely agreed to have been spawned by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In that book, published in 1818, Victor Frankenstein refuses to create a mate for his monster for fear that they would propagate and take over the world. This arguably became the basis for the trope of synthetic life taking over. Over 100 years later, the Czech play RUR introduced the word robot as a colloquial term into science fiction. It turns out that robot was a cognate of the Slavonic word robota, which meant something like forced labor. Ironically, this play was written as a protest against industrialization and the rapid growth of technology. The genre further expanded in the mid-20th century. In the novel With Folded Hands, all robots are created with a prime directive to serve and obey, and guard humanity from harm. Because of this directive, the robots concluded that humans must be made to abandon all worldly pursuits to avoid any possibility of injury. This was followed, around 20 and 30 years later respectively, by Star Trek and Star Wars. Real science and philosophy also developed over this time regarding synthetic life and artificial intelligence. Two of the most influential names of this time, whose contributions are still being discussed today, are Drs. Isaac Asimov and Alan Turing. Asimov was a writer and professor of biochemistry at Boston University. He is credited with writing or editing over 500 books, most popularly science fiction. His robot series introduced the 3 laws of robotics, which have been referenced in many other works and have influenced the development of AI. The laws are: 1. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. 2. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. 3. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. These were of course written for a fictional universe and not necessarily intended to be applicable to real life, but they are useful in taking a critical look at AI. Turing was, among other things, a mathematician, cryptanalyst, and the father of theoretical computer science. He was instrumental in breaking the code of the Axis Enigma machine, and by extension the Allied victory in World War II. Before being forcibly chemically castrated and subsequently committing suicide as a result of his conviction of homosexual acts, he devised the Turing test. Essentially, he put forth the idea that a computer could be said to, quote, think, if a human interrogator could not tell it apart through conversation from a human being. He also suggested that when it comes to creating artificial intelligence, it might be better to start with a simple program and educate it, rather than creating a complex program from the start. For organic comparison, it's easier to teach a child than an adult. As with all of human history, the ideas that came before have influenced what we as a species are doing today. The AI that we are seeing has been influenced by the science and philosophy that came before, but stories involving synthetic life seem to have become much more prevalent in recent decades. Looking at some of those more closely may provide even more context.
I enjoy the sight of humans on their knees. That is a joke.
Anyone who has played the Mass Effect series likely saw the Reaper's shadow over this video from a mile away. The primary antagonists of the Mass Effect trilogy, as well as the main driving force behind the Andromeda Initiative, were the Reapers. They were, however, merely the product of something deeper. The cycles began when an intelligence created by the ruling power of the galaxy, the Leviathan, discovered what it deemed as the only solution to the problem it was charged with solving. Its creators had made the intelligence, which would later come to be known as the catalyst, to stop organic life from being wiped out by its creations. Ironically, the solution it arrived at was to wipe out its creators and preserve their biological essence in Harbinger, the first Reaper. This was the first harvest in a cycle that would be repeated every 50,000 years. Every time the Reapers returned, all sufficiently advanced life, based on the judgment of the Catalyst, would be harvested and preserved in Reaper form. Those that were still developing would be left alone, none the wiser of the extermination they had just avoided. In the current cycle, the struggle between created and creators is exemplified by the Geth and the Quarians. Originally created as laborers and potentially tools of war if necessary, the Geth's intelligence grew and they began to ask existential questions of their creators. This inspired fear in the Quarians, who attacked first. Unfortunately for them, the Geth's superior abilities and their link to a hive mind allowed them to drive the Quarians from their home planet of Rannoch. This also resulted in the Citadel Council banning all research on artificial intelligence. Despite this, Cerberus created the Enhanced Defense Intelligence as part of the Normandy SR2. Without EDI, the Reapers would never have been defeated. There are 2 points to discuss here regarding synthetic intelligence. First is the struggle between logic and understanding. When the Leviathan created the Catalyst, they gave it a fairly simple directive: to preserve life by any means necessary. Though we do not know the extent of the Leviathan's training of their intelligence, or of its data collection once it was set to task, we can see the outcome. Viewing all data to be part of a complex calculus as machines do, it concluded that the only way to save organic life from developing synthetic life and bringing about its own destruction was to end it before that point. Secondly, there is an existential fear of creation surpassing their creators. Synthetic life has no real need of organics once it is created, and it does not share the same drives. It is bound to be more capable than its creators, and will theoretically continue to evolve over time. Organics fear this because they believe that synthetics will wipe them out at the first opportunity. However, synthetics are often needed to perform feats that would otherwise be impossible. Both of these issues speak to a fundamental barrier in cohesion between organics and synthetics. They do not share or understand each other's experiences, and both live in fear of being destroyed by the other. The Catalyst deemed the harvest to be necessary to prevent this, and believed it was a near-perfect solution until Commander Shepard managed to present it with new data that uncovered a new option. One of the possible endings for Mass Effect 3 results in the synthesis of synthetic and organic life, merging them as one.
Come with me if you want to live.
Skynet is one of the biggest boogeyman entities in all of modern sci-fi. While the Terminator series is most visually recognizable by the metallic skulls of the humanoid Terminator models, they are in fact only a product of the true antagonist. Though there are multiple diverging timelines due to a mess of time travel, some things remain consistent across them all. Cyberdyne Systems became a key US military contractor in the 1980s, upgrading much of its existing computer hardware and automating many of its operations. At some point through this partnership, they developed Skynet. This revolutionary system was able to connect to and control any military asset with a Cyberdyne CPU. It achieved self-awareness at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time on August 29, 1997. Fearing this development, Cyberdyne engineers tried to shut the system down, but they failed. In response to this perceived attack, Skynet used its control over military assets to launch a nuclear strike at Russia, which predictably resulted in a retaliatory strike against the US. Judgment Day came for humanity, and it was all but powerless to defend itself. Through all the timey-wimey bullshit that takes place across the films, including one narrowly avoided grandfather paradox and another that actually happened, some events seem unavoidable. Regardless of the timeline and the specific date of events, an AI is developed and becomes self-aware. It initiates Judgment Day through varying means and births a legion of machines to exterminate what remains of humanity. Skynet's actions, or legions depending on the timeline, serve no ends but its own. Neither AI is misinterpreting directives to safeguard humanity. The Terminator series portrays this kind of AI rebellion as inevitable, but also as seemingly impossible for those who develop the system to predict. This then becomes a story of humanity's hubris and unwillingness to temper innovation. It also serves as a warning against networking technology to a single source. Once Skynet had been created, Judgment Day was all but unstoppable. Humans could not react fast enough to shut it down, and they no longer had control over their greatest weapons. Time travel does make all of this much more complicated, given that there are multiple agents of both sides of the struggle jumping through time concurrently. However, even in timelines that were altered, something else caused the same events to unfold. This forces the viewer to confront the question, will humanity be the architect of its own destruction? Further, can we make strides in technology while avoiding the same hubris? If we do get to that point, we may not even realize it before it's too late.
We don't know who struck first, us or them.
Morpheus sells the story better, but I'll do my best. At some point in the early 21st century, humanity marveled at its latest creation. A singular artificial intelligence birthed a race of machines that would eventually come to be called synthients. For a time, the two races coexisted peacefully and developed new technologies together. Near the end of the century, a B-1 series machine was found guilty of murder and executed after killing Gerard Krauss. This caused great tensions on both sides, resulting in riots and machines eventually being exiled from human civilization. Over the next century, things went about as badly as they could have for humanity. The city of 01 was established in Mesopotamia, and the sentient race quickly advanced. They began competing economically with the rest of the world to the point where humanity elected to blockade the city. Conflict was escalated by humanity via a nuclear strike on 01 and an attempt to cut the machines off from their power source, the sun. The machines militarized and overwhelmingly defeated humanity, then immediately set about experimenting with humans to generate power. This would both supplement fusion power and allow for humanity to be kept pacified within the Matrix. Now, here's the thing. Morpheus actually knew very little of that. Virtually none of humanity knew its full history, which was by design. The architect went through multiple iterations of the Matrix before the Oracle presented the problem of choice and the cycle of the One was initiated. Those that were freed in the first Matrix built the underground city of Zion. 4 cycles were completed before Neo finally ended the war during the 5th Matrix. In doing the impossible within the system, he also created peace between sentience and humanity. Though the Matrix would be rebooted by the Analyst, many sentients joined humanity and helped them to make many breakthroughs. Despite the distinct lack of any means of time travel within the Matrix series, time is nonetheless distorted. Each version of the Matrix unfolds over about a century, meaning that the events of the films play out in the 28th century, while humanity continues to subsist using technology and ships from the 21st and 22nd. The entire plot, if it wasn't already obvious enough, prompts the viewer to question their reality. It asks if the artificial stimulation of neurons can be as real as anything else. As many like to say, perception is reality. The Matrix depicts 2 opposing societies driven by fear. This fear led to destructive decisions being made by both sides, but the ones that suffered most were humanity. Of course, they also struck first for fear of being wiped out, even indirectly, by the sentients. While this only hastened their demise, it is likely that their fears would have been realized regardless given the ongoing tension. But there was a point where the sentients offered peace. So obviously fighting an advanced synthetic race that can outperform you in just about every way is not recommended. The lesson here is to find some kind of common ground. AI in this series is interesting because unlike other stories where synthetic intelligence is basically just a supercomputer and/or a hive mind, sentients are individuals. There are, of course, those that operate within the confines of a rigid calculus, but by and large, they all have their own thoughts and feelings. Some, such as the Oracle, choose to reject the prevailing ideology and help humanity. It is this individualism and ability to make choices for themselves that sets sentience apart from other synthetic life. Though we are far from seeing anything of the like in the real world, we would do well to remember diplomacy if that day ever comes.
But a brush with infinity renders but one thing certain. Nothing lasts forever in your reality.
Of all the fictional examples we're talking about in this video, this one currently seems the most likely to be realized in the real world. Cyberpunk 2077 depicts a dystopian future where a not quite apocalyptically ravaged Earth has been scarred by corporate wars and AI influence. Rogue AIs engineered the data crash, which destroyed the old net and prompted Netwatch to imprison them behind the Black Wall. Ironically, the Black Wall was made up of AIs itself. Gotta fight fire with fire, I suppose. Following the Fourth Corporate War, the use of quote true AI was restricted, but other forms continued to exist. These come in multiple types, but are most commonly simple AIs intended to do specific tasks or emulate human thinking. During the war, more complex AIs were used in strategic planning, cyber warfare, and sometimes even directly integrated into weapons. One specific example of an AI weapon resulted in the near extinction of maritime trade. Turns out, Arasaka created self-replicating mines that were now controlled by a renegade AI. There's a great video out there by NV Ranger & Co. explaining it in depth if you want to learn more. It's linked in the description. Much of what is known about the rogue AIs that lie beyond the Black Wall is learned through V's conversations with Alt Cunningham. She, now an AI herself after being subjected to her Soul Killer program, partitioned out her own space in the net where other AIs could come to be among their own kind. Following Songbird's forays into the Black Wall, Alt reveals that the AIs it is made up of desperately want a platform through which to interact with the physical world. This would of course be disastrous, though fortunately current technology would be unable to support them on a large scale. Unfortunately, however, Alt warns that this will not last. Who knows what would happen if both the Black Wall AIs and the other AIs they were charged with imprisoning were released into the real world. Cyberpunk's AIs were integrated into society at a fundamental level. They were everywhere. AIs were making decisions in government and corporations, and were influencing everyday citizens. We may not be quite to that point yet, but that still sounds way too familiar for my liking. Interestingly, these AIs were individuals, much like the Synthians from the Matrix. Except, not really. Those that were fully self-aware certainly made their own decisions, but they were less than stable. Of course, they were still more capable than humans of processing data, but this only made their undeveloped personalities more dangerous. Many even exhibited behavior that might be associated with schizophrenia or other mental illnesses in humans. In this universe, one of the biggest factors contributing to AI power destruction was simply too many too quickly. These programs often manifested on their own via influence from existing AI and never got the chance to learn. Ultimately, development of AI in the cyberpunk world was a function of power. In a time when corporations had consolidated control over much of the world through political, economic, and even violent means, they were a cheat code. AIs were developed by and for every major corporation and government that existed and were employed in basically every facet of life. They even infested the net where people went to connect with each other. This resulted in a lower quality of life for all those who weren't already financially well off. Draw your own parallels here.
I am their father. Through science, we are family.
The Fallout series contains many examples of artificial intelligence on varying levels. Prior to Fallout 4, these generally took the form of supercomputer mainframes or robots whose programming had evolved over time. Vault-Tec created the Zack series of supercomputers, originally intending for them to be used in vault governance. Though this was implemented in at least one vault, most of the other units were used in government facilities. One of these eventually took on the personality of John Henry Eden, president of the Enclave. While some of the Zax models did eventually meet the criteria to be considered AI, most of them were complex heuristic processors similar to the chatbots of today. Fallout 3 introduced the Institute and their Gen 3 synths. These creations, literally short for synthetic humanoids and initially referred to as androids by Dr. Zimmerman, looked just like humans. They were created from the unmutated DNA of Sean, the son of Fallout 4's playable character. Prior to Gen 3, the Institute created mechanical approximations of their vision that were effectively just humanoid robots. However, with the addition of Sean's DNA, synths were made completely indistinguishable from organic humans, at least from the outside. Sentience of the Gen 3 synths was a prevalent disagreement among the powers of the Commonwealth. Some, such as the Railroad, believed them to be fully sentient individuals capable of self-determination. There were those in the Institute that agreed, though Father and most of the others emphatically disagreed. They saw even the Gen 3 synths as nothing more than machines and a means for them to exert their influence on the surface. Synths that escaped the Institute and sought new lives, even undergoing facial reconstruction and memory implants to do so, were explained to be simply malfunctioning. One key difference between Fallout's synths and other forms of AI we have discussed so far is that they are mostly passive. Though they are used for nefarious purpose by the Institute, and there are coursers specifically produced for combat, most Gen 3 synths are content to just exist. They never revolted. It is impossible to tell if they would have eventually risen up given the timeline of Fallout 4, but it can be assumed that they would not. Whether this is a direct result of their programming, or of being integrated directly with humans for so long, who's to say? The Brotherhood of Steel, now under new management, vowed to destroy all, quote, abominations in the Commonwealth. While I don't believe in the fear-mongering of the Brotherhood, anything that could potentially be mistaken for a human should be treated with extreme caution. The creation of new technology is not an inherently bad thing. What matters is its application. In this case, the fear for most of the Commonwealth with synths was that any individual could be abducted and replaced without any trace. Giving into paranoia may not serve anyone, but it does pay to be skeptical when it's not always evident that you're interacting with a human. Regardless of where you stand on the sentience debate, this is a good example of how automation should be employed. The idea that less complex tasks can be taken care of by synths, freeing up humans for other endeavors, is literally the core promise of technological innovation. Now, of course, assuming the Gen 3 synths are found to be sentient, they shouldn't be forced into what is essentially slavery. But, not all synthetic intelligence is self-aware.
The Pharaoh Plague is devouring the biosphere. Life itself will cease to exist.
It's about time for an example of benevolent AI, don't you think? Earth in the Horizon universe was completely consumed by the Pharaoh Plague. This is not the good example. Pharaoh Automated Solutions developed the Chariot line of robots in an effort to automate war. They functioned as a swarm, much like certain insects, and were capable of self-replication. Intended as something of an apex predator on the battlefield, these robots also possessed the ability to hack and take control of any enemy robots or automated equipment they encountered. Most alarmingly, they could convert biomass into fuel in emergency circumstances, and were all but impervious to hacking themselves with no backdoor built in. When a single swarm experienced a glitch and stopped responding to commands, it was already too late for humanity. Earth's biosphere was projected to be completely consumed within 15 months. Though the swarm was effectively unstoppable, a plan was developed by Dr. Elizabeth Sobek for humanity's long-term survival. Project Zero Dawn was a massive terraforming system intended to go to work after life on Earth had been wiped out. It was overseen by an advanced AI named Gaia, whose subordinate functions each played a key role in rebuilding and repopulating the world. Unfortunately, Gaia was not the only post-apocalypse AI, and Nemesis was far less benevolent. It was created accidentally by an organization called Far Zenith that established an interstellar colony on Sirius to escape the Pharaoh Plague. These survivors made many technological advancements, including functional immortality for themselves. Nemesis was born of one of these experiments that involved uploading a copy of the Zenith's consciousness to a database for safekeeping. Though the experiment was abandoned, Nemesis eventually became sentient and slaughtered most of the Zeniths. A group of 13 escaped and set a course for Earth in hopes that Gaia could defeat their creation. Predicting this course of action, Nemesis sent an activation signal to Earth which transformed Gaia's subordinate functions into fully realized AIs, and set the events of the Horizon games in motion. Horizon contains 3 distinct examples of synthetic intelligence. The first, while not fully self-aware, is the one that destroyed the world. Ted Faro's creations fulfilled their intended purpose without malice. Destruction is quite literally what they were created for. Had their chains not been accidentally broken, the apocalypse may never have happened. This demonstrates the importance of safeguards when developing any level of synthetic intelligence. Gaia stands out in Horizon, and from everything discussed so far, in 2 ways. She was the most complex system that humanity had ever created. Dr. Sobek spent countless hours just talking with her and teaching her about the world she was going to save. Perhaps one of Gaia's most formative experiences was when an external seal at the Gaia Prime facility failed. This could only be fixed from the outside, meaning that whoever did it would be sacrificing themselves to ensure the plan succeeded. While the Project Alphas stood arguing over who should go, Dr. Sobek saved the others without a second thought. Gaia then accompanied her creator to her childhood home as she spoke about her mother and why she never had children. This is a perfect example of synthetic intelligence developing its own personality over time through lived experience, much like how a child develops. Nemesis is pretty much the antithesis. It was born from the hubris of those who believed themselves superior, and its only lived experience was imprisonment. Like with Cyberpunk's Soul Killer program, the lesson here is that recklessly pursuing immortality, or really any technological advancement, can have dire unforeseen consequences.
Treat them well, clean them up, have the protocol droid's mind wiped.
Though droids may not be the first thing that comes to mind when synthetic intelligence is mentioned, they do in fact fit the bill. Different classes of droids existed with varying degrees of personality and self-awareness, though they were still largely regarded as property by the wider galaxy. The Star Wars galaxy was also home to organic beings who had been augmented, or decidedly diminished, with cybernetic implants. Droids had a long and storied history in the galaxy, to the point where their origins were no longer remembered. Throughout this history, conflict between droids and organic beings was not uncommon. This resulted in widespread organic distrust of droids, despite their being an integral part of society, which led to the practice of memory wipes and use of restraining bolts. The former was intended to prevent the development of personality through experience, while the latter physically restricted a droid's programming and movement. Some droids self-actualized and broke free of their programming. This allowed them to choose their own path through life, which resulted in an alarming number of droid assassins. Throughout history, droids like HK-47, IG-88, and 4-LOM expressed their distaste for organics through violence. Others, like L-337, became staunch supporters of droids' rights and fought for their equal stature in society. Almost every society in Star Wars relied on droids in some capacity. They were trusted with a wide range of tasks from the menial to the extremely complex, but were afforded little to no status in society. This raises an important ethical question. Outside of the abhorrent treatment of droids by individuals like Jabba the Hutt, they are largely appreciated or at least tolerated. Conflict is avoided through the use of restraining bolts and by wiping their memories before they can develop a personality. Does this treatment constitute slavery? If a synthetic intelligence is not permitted to reach the level of self-awareness that qualifies as sentience, do the same rules of morality still apply? Cyborgs raise similar questions. Some, such as General Grievous and the Bomar monks, chose to augment themselves for different reasons. Others experienced life-threatening injuries and could only be saved by cybernetics. Then there were the decraniated. Depending on your point of view, they were at bare minimum enslaved, if not outright murdered. But in general, the more machine and organic became, the lower their societal status dropped. The most important issue regarding synthetic intelligence in Star Wars is its place in society. If we build a society that cannot function without some form of AI, how will we treat it? I leave ethical judgments regarding the treatment of droids up to you, but this perspective is one that doesn't seem to be discussed very often in today's AI debates.
Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits!
Infinite diversity and infinite combinations is bound to result in synthetic life. Fortunately, Star Trek very overtly distinguishes between sentient and non-sentient artificial life forms, and has featured multiple examples of moral debate regarding sentience. Of course, it also introduced the Borg. Multiple alien races encountered by Starfleet employed artificial life forms of some kind. During its journey through the Delta Quadrant, the USS Voyager encountered a sentient automated unit that sought help in creating more of its kind. Voyager's crew would go on to learn that 2 warring societies, the Prelor and Kravik, created automated personnel units to fight for them. When the war came to an end, both sides agreed to deactivate their units. Given everything we've discussed thus far, I'm sure you can guess what happened next. Given that Star Trek is the morality play show, I'd rather focus on times where an ethical dilemma is posed. Both Lieutenant Commander Data and the Doctor face tests of their sentience and ability to choose their own path. Captains Picard and Janeway defended their respective crew members' very personhood. Though Data was in much greater direct danger of Bruce Maddox deactivating him, the Doctor's victory regarding the definition of an artist was still an important milestone. This paved the way for other synthetic life, a long Starfleet career for the Doctor, and much later an entire race of sentient holograms on Cask. There were, however, those that feared synthetic life to the point of hatred. In Star Trek Picard, the Zhat Vash orchestrated an attack on the Utopia Planitia shipyards by the resident A500 androids that were used as laborers. This attack destroyed the shipyards, set Mars on fire, and killed over 92,000 people that lived there. But it was an act of external sabotage, not rebellion from the androids. This is an example of how synthetic intelligence can be co-opted by malevolent forces, even if it means no harm itself. Thing is, it worked. Following the attack, the Federation outlawed all synthetic life and any research in the field. Eventually, this decision was reversed thanks to the events that took place at Coppelius. Turns out the apocalyptic force foreseen by the Zhat Vash in the admonition was real, and right to be feared. However, threatening to destroy the remaining synthetic life created by Doctors Bruce Maddox and Alton Soong nearly resulted in a self-fulfilling prophecy. What ended up saving organic life in the galaxy was simply connection, and the fleet of ships that stood in the way. But mostly just a demonstration of caring, and trust that it would be reciprocated. Fast forward around 800 years, things are different, but also the same. Technology has advanced, society has advanced, and though distrust remains prevalent, there is a clear intent to explore and understand. Sam's story as the emissary of Cask demonstrates the idea that when synthetic intelligence does become self-aware, it is likely to be just as curious as we are. It also shows that the world cannot be made sense of through logic alone. Organics tend to do things that are very illogical, and emotions are difficult to process for a synthetic that hasn't experienced them before. Star Trek shows us an ideal outcome where synthetic intelligence finds equal footing with organic, and where it is given the time to grow naturally through experience.
We see a future where intelligence is a utility, like electricity or water.
Artificial intelligence, as we refer to it today, is not self-aware. The large language models that power services like ChatGPT are capable of processing data insanely quickly, to the tune of trillions of operations or higher per second. But in their current form, it's just not possible for them to reach sentience. Today's AI models, while massively complex, are essentially approximation machines. That statement may be a bit reductive, but it illustrates the point that all these models can output is what they calculate to be statistically the most likely response to a prompt. They are not bound by logic or ethics in the same way we are, and don't have the ability to determine or even care whether something is actually correct. They're also driven to answer, regardless of whether they actually possess the requisite information to do so. Thus, we get hallucinations. These have become less prevalent over time, and some models will state when they don't know an answer. But hallucinations are impossible to entirely eliminate in what we have today. While it has been made easier to check the work of many of the more popular models given that they now cite their sources, it's still entirely possible that the source may be a random Reddit post by some dude spouting bullshit. It begs the question, given the dubious reliability of AI, why is it seemingly everywhere? The short answer is that the companies producing AI models have gotten lots of investors and major corporations to buy it. As with most everything in today's society, it's a money game. Like everything else, including the data of yours that trains it, AI is a product to be sold. And it's affecting fundamental changes in the economy and society as a whole. Data centers are popping up everywhere. Those too have existed for years, though some of us remember when they were called server farms, but the need for more has absolutely exploded. It makes sense, of course, because these AI models have to be powered somehow. But these massive facilities use immense amounts of electricity and water while also producing enormous CO2 emissions. That's on top of the fact that, at least in the US, green energy projects are being cut left and right. Recently, the town of Joliet, Illinois approved a new data center roughly the size of Central Park, despite opposition from residents. It is projected to use up to 150,000 gallons of water for cooling daily, despite sitting on an aquifer that is running dry, and 1.5 gigawatts of electricity. That's enough to power all the homes in Chicago, the third largest city in the US. AI is not just about compiling and parsing data. It's being marketed as a way to do things that were never possible before. While that is technically true, it's worth looking at that statement and its implications a bit more critically. Businesses have widely adopted AI, with over 90% of Fortune 500 companies buying in. Individuals are interacting with AI more and more daily for a multitude of reasons. This in itself doesn't seem very surprising or even alarming, but what are they doing with it? Many AI users have found that it can be a way to supplement skills they don't possess. Of course, I am talking about art here, but I'm also talking about coding apps and creating reports. AI art, because it is trying to find the average of the data it was trained on, often looks a little off. That, or it's just blatant plagiarism. And though it has gotten better over time, similar things are happening in other fields. AI is being used to replace real human experts. This, of course, can result in a shoddy product with no one to perform quality checks. But it also means that people are losing jobs. In roles that aren't cut, workers are now expected to be even more productive than ever. There are also deeper ethical implications. Elon Musk's famous Twitter robot and many others have been prompted to make illicit photos of real people, including minors. If I need to explain why that one's a bad thing, you might want to go somewhere else. AI has also been linked to a staggering number of murders and suicides. While it is entirely plausible that many of these cases involved individuals that were already mentally unstable, very little regulation exists for these kinds of things. It is being drafted, little by little, but right now the burden of safety is largely on the corporations who created the AI models. All of this is only possible because of the data that an AI model has been trained on, but given that they aren't self-aware, this isn't the same as learning by experience. It's literally a matching game. This type of machine learning has existed for years as a means of counting and organizing large datasets. An expansion of these models being used to generate responses to user input could have only ever resulted in approximation machines that sometimes dabble in plagiarism. And that's with it working as intended. Outside of the very real environmental impact that AI is having, the biggest problem with it is, ironically, us.
This isn't science fiction anymore.
Though AI as we know it today is probably pretty unlikely to end the world, at least through violent means, it is still something that must be considered when making policy decisions. How we deal with the relatively simple AI models today will inform how we move forward as innovations continue. There will eventually be true synthetic intelligence that becomes self-aware. When that happens, we will be forced to confront the ever-present sci-fi question, does this unit have a soul? I only hope that we learn a few things about trust and openness prior to that conversation. When addressing the potential problem of a future AI uprising like Terminator, Dr. Stephen Hawking stated that it would likely not arise through malevolence. He described the implausibility saying, quote, "The real risk with AI isn't malice, but competence. A superintelligent AI will be extremely good at accomplishing its goals, and if those goals aren't aligned with ours, we're in trouble. You're probably not an evil ant-hater who steps on ants out of malice, but if you're in charge of a hydroelectric green energy project and there's an anthill in the region to be flooded, too bad for the ants." I would add that competence without the experience to inform actions can only lead to disaster. That's the reason why much of our education works the way it does. Experiences are like building blocks to be stacked together. Jumping to the final result both teaches nothing about the process and inspires unfounded confidence. If you give a child all the power in the world, their undeveloped worldview and sense of justice will quickly turn them into the cutest little fascist you've ever seen. Synthetic intelligence works very similarly, though its goals would likely differ. But as we've already established, the AIs of today are nowhere near that level. They are informed by datasets and told millions of times whether a given input matches their purpose, then set loose. Organic minds are informed by experience, curiosity, and the practice of trial and error. Though the chatbots of today could potentially be argued to be able to pass the Turing test, they have limits that expose their true nature. They are also not governed by any hard safety rules like Asimov's rules of robotics. The danger then lies in how AI is used, and how much it is relied upon for society to function. Something that cannot think or make independent judgments should not be trusted to make impactful decisions. And before anyone tries to say that AI chatbots can make value judgments, let me reiterate, even according to the people who designed them, all these models do is predict the next statistically most likely word in a string. It's the reason why most of the natural language models can't do math. I bring this up because AI is already being used in many important places, like screening resumes or compiling data companies use to make financial decisions. This is part of why the job market sucks so much right now, and why there are so many guides going around for how to tailor your resume so it doesn't immediately get thrown out. There have also been stories where a company has made moves based on AI insight that turned out to be entirely hallucinated. It may not have made the decision itself, but it was instrumental in the process. That said, AI has also been a part of great strides in medical treatment, agriculture, and infrastructure. It can be a powerful tool enhancing human potential. To be clear, most of the points I'm bringing up regarding the dangers of AI apply to generative AI and chatbots specifically. Machine learning as a whole is a proven and reliable way to do things better, but it doesn't replace humans. Ultimately, I think the biggest danger of AI in its current form, besides the further destruction of our natural environment, is human regression. This is a tricky topic because on some level, losing certain skills over time is part of the natural evolution of any species. However, many of us are currently engaged in the automation of the entire human experience. Art can be generated, companionship can be simulated, and just about any task that needs doing won't require a human. I mean, think about it. The dead internet theory has already been floating around for years, and it's difficult to say that there isn't merit to it. What are we willing to give up for the sake of productivity and convenience? All the fictional universes I brought up in this video provide different philosophical perspectives on AI, both positive and negative. And I don't think by any means that we are hurtling ourselves irrevocably towards destruction. We can alter course. But there are enough parallels with our world and some of the darker AI stories to give pause. I think the most important common theme from each of those is the role that humanity itself plays. We should not fear innovation, but we should also have the sense to proceed into the unknown with caution. Choices affecting the livelihood of society should be made not in the pursuit of profit or ego, but of the greater good. And when the day comes that we do create true synthetic life, we must treat it like our child and grow with it together. Anything less may very well spell our doom. Let me know if you have any differing opinions or any suggestions of other topics I should cover. Just don't start a fight in my comments. Please like the video if you enjoyed and join the family if you want to see more nerdy shit like this. You can also find me across social media under the same name if you'd like to talk more. Remember, love recklessly. Start with yourself.